Great. So thank you to those of you who are coming. Tony and I were just discussing, we're guessing by the fact that not many of you showed up that there's just complete endorsement of everything that's happening. So that's news to our ears. But no, look, we do welcome the opportunity to meet with parents to further sort of discuss the rationale and philosophy behind the program and some of the logistical implications for the students next year. We're really excited by this program, and I think once we start talking through the philosophy and how it's going to work, I think you'll share our enthusiasm for what we're trying to do next year. We have met with the students already, so I think some of them may have come home and told you a little bit about the program. But just to start off with, I think I want to just take you back to 18 months ago when we started looking as part of our strategic plan what we wanted to do, particularly at the middle school. And obviously you'll be familiar with the Mulgrave vision statement, and I think it was as a faculty and even to a certain extent from the student and parent consultation process that it was that area highlighted in red that we really leaned on and said, is this an area as part of the middle school program that potentially warrants some investigation in terms of how we're doing this as effectively as we can? So obviously that serving their communities, and as you're aware, there are some things that are going on in the middle school program that do this very well. But as Tony will speak about in more detail later on in the presentation, we're just worried to the extent in which all of our students are doing this. We think some do it really well, but obviously as part of our vision, we think it's important that all of our students are participating in those kind of experiences. So if I take you forward now to our value statements, so we can get it back up on the screen. That was sort of the next area that we leaned on in terms of our strategic planning process. And again, you'll see in our value statements, which are published and available, it's that piece around the global perspective, environmental and social responsibility. Again, I think as a faculty, we started questioning and saying, is this something that we're as committed to as we should be, given that these are our published and adopted statements of vision for our education across the K through 12, pre-K through 12 spectrum. And because I think we all agreed that was potentially an area where we could improve, that we then started having some discussions about how we might do this. And obviously underpinning this element of our vision statement, we've been having parallel conversations about the way in which we focus on the skills agenda. And I think if you think of things like empathy, humility, respect for others, your commitment to environmentalism, intercultural awareness, some of those skills, I think that's where we felt that this is obviously the opportunity where those things can be there can be intentional exposure and teaching for all of our students. So we subsequently have come up with a way in which we are really confident that we can address all of those things through the introduction of a global experiential learning program that's more intentional and more comprehensive in the way that it's delivered to all of our students. So I'm going to turn now over to Tony just to walk through the logistics of the actual grade 9 program for next year.
And again, I just want to reiterate, I'm really excited about this. Obviously, this is kind of in my world, and I've spent the past 10 years having students involved in different kinds of service learning experiences, local and global. But the greatest challenge there is how do we make sure, and we've had these discussions in our groups of students that go, how do we really make sure that this is a collective impact? How do we get everybody engaged? How do we have it so that people share the experiences and share the inspiration and come back and act as catalysts for social change and social good? And so having this opportunity to begin to look at how we can launch this within our school is a really cool and exciting thing for me. And so what we're starting with is an initial idea of piloting a project with the grade 9s next year. And this is your Global Experiential Learning Project. I'm really calling it a project because it's not just a week, but it's an entire year, a program of learning and then a program of service, and hopefully afterwards one of sharing an exhibition and taking it further. So part of this week is a service learning week. And I put it in quotes just because technically it's not always going to be 7 days within it, depending on what kind of project the students get engaged in. It's about the pre-trip and the post-trip experience, as well as the trip. It's not all about the trip, right? That's important. And then there's an exhibition of the learning, some sort of an exchange of learning that's part of this program. And Martin has already gone over to some degree why. I'm just going to throw these out really quickly, but obvious things. For me, the real world learning, this is where learning sticks. This is where the impact is greatest. I mean, I'm sure you've looked at studies about how we learn, and in the end, we teach. That's one of the most powerful ways of learning, and if we experience, it's critical for developing those skills. So, and deep learning, where you really experience it and connect with others. Martin has already brought up the 21st century skills. So from intercultural awareness to collaboration, empathy, global mindedness, all of these experiences happening locally or globally when you're engaged in experiences around service. Beyond lunch, trying to run programs where we want to get kids engaged in service learning and leadership, but a lot of our opportunities are after school, lunchtime, and weekends. You know what your kids do on those times, how much time is spent with other things that are really valuable that they do. We need to find a way to embed it within our school curriculum. Personalization, the way we've set up the program is all about choice, making sure that kids have a chance to pursue passions, explore things they never thought about before. So it's not a program that is packaged where you're limited. And then right now, the whole concept of service over self, Martin introduced me to an article that recently came out where they talked about Ivy League schools who are emphasizing that they're not looking for students that have engaged in all sorts of service hours or all kinds of different volunteer experiences. They want to see students that have been engaged in a long-term, meaningful service learning project. And that's going to be one of the key tickets for them deciding what kinds of students they want to bring into their schools. So it fits within those values, it fits within even those strategic values or strategic goals as well for future opportunities for students. Okay, so what does it really mean here? So right now at Mulgrave we have a GEO program, the Global Education and Outreach Program. And what does that do? So we have trips from grade 7 to 12. Typically we have one for the middle school, one for kind of in the middle, grade 10s, 11s, and then we have a trip for the grade 11s. And then we have the grade 9 Eastern Canada trip. And we've kind of gone over some of the limitations, but it's really hard to have pre-trip and post-trip engagement when it's not embedded in the curriculum. It's not integrated within the academic year in the sense that it's not something that is easily put within our curriculum. And how do we make that happen so it's more meaningful? It's not just this experience out there, but it's very much what happens within our school, within our spaces, within our classrooms. Limited participation, right? I mean, we've had over 40 students go out on trips this year, but obviously that's limited compared to the full possible impact. And then a long-term impact. I mean, if you really want to develop these connections with communities, we need a much longer and broader connection. And I think that's the kind of sustainable, meaningful impact that we want to have. If we're going to go to Tanzania or we're going to go to Ecuador, let's make sure that we can have a real impact and real connections beyond just those few students that get to go. So here's what we're looking at now. For all the grade 9s to participate in a program for the year. It's going to include the week, which would be the week before the May 21st holiday week that we have right now. It's obviously going to have, I've said, the pre and the post experience programming. So those are things that we will look at how we can embed that within the academic program or the school day. So there are opportunities to make sure that there's learning beforehand and preparation and exploration around the issues that they're getting engaged in, even actual experiences to prepare them. And then looking at both local and global service learning projects, and looking at making sure that we are sharing these experiences. And that doesn't just mean sharing on here at Mulgrave, right? Since this is quite an exclusive area, but looking at ways of broadening and reaching out and connecting with the experiences that they do in our community. Okay, and then the other part that I really want to emphasize within this is also local. This is not about going to other places. This is about going to other places and going within our own backyard as well. And we have a comprehensive local program that we want to develop. This is really innovative. Nobody else has this right now. In my explorations, I can find partners who will take you to the Dominican Republic, but I can't find a partner who will develop a meaningful social or service learning project in Vancouver. There are lots of organizations there, they don't have the resources to set this up. So we're looking at setting that up and making that happen. And so we don't just have these individual experiences. I took my advisory group to Quest Food Exchange, and it was an awesome social enterprise that's involved in finding different ways to get people in need, people on the margins, to get access to food resources that's not a food bank. And they had said they would love to partner with us and come up with creative ways to make a difference.
So it's local and global. And here's what we're looking for right now in terms of our options. With an understanding that as we pilot this with grade 9, not every trip is necessarily going to run. What we're putting out there as options first is Haida Gwaii, and we're certainly seeing Haida Gwaii as global for a number of reasons. One just being that we have to fly there and leave the vicinity. But I also think that taking our students within a First Nations culture and environment is a global experience. It's a different experience, and it's an incredibly powerful one. And we're excited. We're working with an organization that works with university students. Many of these organizations do, and working on developing a package there for that, which would involve both service and learning about First Nations cultures. Going to Tanzania, so we've gone to Kenya, and we are going this year, and we've gone for a long time through Midawee. We're looking at developing a special new partnership. Midawee has recently returned to Tanzania, and they want us to come in there and work with a sister community, and that's an exciting opportunity for us. Obviously, this one would not be a 7 to 10 day trip. We're looking at that being something like a 12-day experience. China, we've gone to Midawee, China before. We typically go into a rural community and work with a school, and then go to the Shaolin Temple where we work with monks and work with a local orphanage that they support. Ecuador is in the Chimborazo region, in the mountains, in the Andes, and we work with indigenous communities there through Midawee, building schools and working within their pillars. And those are things that I can explain more in terms of what Midawee does, about working with Free the Children. Another new one we're looking at is an organization called Educational Excursions. They work with a lot of IB and international schools, United World College in Asia, and they have a variety of programs in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. We want to try to make a different kind of connection in areas that we haven't gone before. And we want to explore their world because they specifically develop service learning programs for international schools. The last one is through an organization called Insight Global Education. These are SFU graduates, international development graduates, who are looking at having an alternative model of service learning. They're not looking to build a school or to teach in a classroom or build a house. They want you to go and partner up with innovative social enterprises in communities where they are already fighting poverty and they are already very successful. They want you to connect with them, to work with them, and hopefully to be inspired by them. And so this is a model that's looking at social entrepreneurship and creative ways that other organizations have been making a difference. Fiji is the one that we're looking at right now with them. So those are the global options. Do you want me to go to the local next, and then we'll open it up for questions?
I have questions if you want to really lost.
So within the local one, a lot of it, as I said, is about us creating these opportunities. And so what I've done right now, as I begin to develop them, is group them thematically. So environment and First Nations. I've had discussions with John, with West Vancouver Streamkeepers, David Suzuki Foundation, and UBC Farm. And looking at ways in which we could get students engaged in their project. UBC Farm runs camps and programs for youth and for university students. Streamkeepers do a lot of things on the North Shore. And then the David Suzuki Foundation has some innovative camps as well. And so we're trying to see if all three of those organizations might be able to connect on that kind of a thematic local experience. A lot of people have been requesting opportunities, especially with the Syrian refugee crisis, to see what we can do there. You won't be surprised that I haven't got a phone call back because people are so busy and responding to so much interest in that. But I'm trying to connect with the Immigrant Services Society of BC about coming up with a creative project around that, and I'm excited about that possibility. Hunger and Social Enterprise, I mentioned we went to Quest Food Exchange. There's also the local Harvest Project on the North Shore, which is a more traditional food bank. But Quest is like, bring them in. We want people to work with food control, quality control. We'll teach them. We need people for accounting. Essentially, it's an enterprise that collects food that is going to go to waste, so they connect with other food distribution places, and food that is about to expire, or food that they can't sell but is still totally fine for sale. And they set up a grocery store where those in need get to shop in a dignified way. But they need lots of different kinds of help for that, and they're opening up a place in North Vancouver this year, I believe. So that's a really cool opportunity. Poverty and homelessness, so this can be through Habitat for Humanity. Yes, we have Habitat for Humanity operating in Burnaby. We do a backpack drive for Directions Youth Services Center, and they also have connections with other youth services center that they said that they would really like a partner to help them with recreational activities. And there's also Covenant House, which has lots of opportunities to work with street youth. So this focuses on youth and homelessness and poverty. History and Culture is a service learning program Mr. Hardy is passionate about. He's setting something up on Vancouver Island to connect with local museums and First Nations groups and focus on culture and looking at ways in which we can help these museums and their focus on preserving the history and also the unique culture of Vancouver Island, especially First Nations, but also Chinese culture as well, and Japanese culture. And the last one is arts and recreation. I know students want that. There's lots of possibilities, but I'm working on looking at that with groups like, say, North Shore Neighborhood House and others on the North Shore, where we can have students engaged in either the arts or in working with young children. So those are the local, and that's the global. So I wanted to open it up to any questions on those kind of options that we're putting out there.
We could probably pause there before we sort of roll out kind of what our timeline is like. I mean, I guess the other piece to add on to what Tony said, and he referenced this being a pilot. It's a pilot in as much as this program will obviously be in place for our grade 9s next year, and then the following year, we will introduce this to the grade 8s as well. So the following year it'll be the grade 8s and 9s, and they will have the choice at grade 8 and 9 to go on a local international trip. Service learning project. The grade 7s, we're going to be developing a residential sort of leadership and social entrepreneurialism program that will take place mostly kind of on campus during the same week. So we'll have that focus week. And the reason we chose the grade 9 specifically, there's a couple of reasons. Number one is they're the oldest students, so in terms of managing the trips and excursions, they're the easiest from the sort of logistics point of view. The second and more important piece is obviously with the current arrangements of what was the Eastern Canada trip, we're conscious of parents paying out extra money on a year-on-year basis. So we just felt that replacing that excursion with the service learning project ensures to some extent that those costs are managed and mitigated, so there are no additional costs. The costs will simply be used potentially, if your child chooses an international trip, to go on one of these excursions instead of what would have been the Eastern Canada trip. Some of you will be aware that the Eastern Canada trip itself is now going to be taught at grade 6 instead of the Eastern US trip. So we will be managing for the next 3 years, between the grade 6 and 9s that come up, a site-based opportunity that's being developed through the Humanities Department, where the grade 9s will go to Victoria for the day for the parliamentary piece. So that's how we're trying to sort of grandfather those couple groups through that won't have the grade 6 trip in place. So I hope that makes sense in terms of how we're rolling things out. And of course, we think this gives great flexibilities for families during grade 8 and 9 to make decisions about what year might work best for them in terms of when their child maybe does something local and then maybe does something international. And of course, if you're comfortable with your child going away 2 years to international options, that would be okay as well. Or if they wanted to do local options both years, that would be equally feasible. Obviously, the cost for the local options will be nothing. And the cost for the international options will range, but we're hoping to obviously keep those costs as close to the same cost that students were paying for the Eastern Canada trip as possible. Certainly, if there's a huge interest in going to Fiji, we expect that those costs will be a little bit higher.
What's, I think, exciting about this in the long run, right now, obviously, with the choice, I mean, we threw it out to the grade 9s, and I know this isn't you. When we asked them, so, are you interested in the local or global? So 90%, of course, put up their hands, they want to go global. What I think is really important that we want to emphasize is we are not looking to send them global. We want students to get engaged locally. And from talking to students of the past who have been engaged locally and done volunteer experiences, perhaps yourself too, often the most impactful experience is working within your own community. Doesn't mean that you're not inspired by what you do globally and that the kinds of connections and skills that you develop aren't incredible, but often you find your place in that local experience where you realize what you want to do, and because it's within your own community and it has that effect.
In an ideal world, 2 years from now, we'll have the grade 7s doing this sort of locally developed leadership and social entrepreneurial program where they start to explore the ways they can make an impact and a difference. The grade 8 year students would choose something local, and then grade 9s, they would do international. So they have that sort of scaffolding of experiences. Obviously, having some choice at the grade 8, 9 level, there's some flexibility for families, and I think that's important. If you have a holiday plan, for example, somewhere, and you just prefer your child doesn't go international in grade 9, then you can do some managing of when they're going away and when they're staying.
And then for some of you may already have, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you've talked to Ms. McTavish about whether these things will satisfy the requirement for the Duke of Ed residential service project.
I haven't directly talked to her about that, but I think in general they will, right? But I know there's sometimes some issues around how many times you have to change camp or something like that.
I'm certainly no expert on those parts of the rules, but I know that when my older daughter did her residential project, they did it, but you have to be 14 to be enrolled in the Duke of Ed, right? So for kids who wouldn't yet be 14 when this happens, they're still having to do another trip later.
Yeah. Certainly, one of the things this does address for us is we are now, year upon year, all of our students have their major service commitment, for their CAS point of view, addressed within their program, because there's that pre-trip learning, there's the week of exposure, and then the post-trip exhibition. So at grade 7, 8, 9, we're satisfied that all of our students will be having really meaningful experiences in that regard.
And if you have a son or daughter coming into grade 7 next year, or grade 8 too, so we are looking at piloting that social entrepreneurism camp-like project. So that's out there, and then we're also looking at something for the grade 8s. Those aren't necessarily finalized, but obviously it could look pretty exciting for grade 7, 8, looking at these grade 9s going off in these projects, and there's great opportunities for the pilot all sorts of them to make sure that we have like a good model for the following year. Any questions?
A question with my parent hat on. This is really exciting. One of the things that you and I were speaking about before the meeting started is just how exciting the continuity of giving to a certain group can be. So, for example, if my son went to Haidawai in grade 8 and then found that, well, he really has a strong connection with that community and wants to go back again the following year, is there the opportunity to do that? Is that something you would discourage? And if it was okay, could it even continue into grade 10 and 11?
Certainly, I think that the feasibility of the grade 8 to 9 thing would absolutely be okay. Obviously that would, be a family decision as to what they, felt was manageable. Going into grade 10, I think that's something that we have to look at. I know there will be a range of, service learning options at grade 10. I know the Ladakh trip, for example, has been pitched for the senior school students, but I think we will retain to some extent the sort of GEO experiences as well for older students, and the timing of that will need to be worked out. But we, I think your point, Elizabeth, which is a really important one, is we want our students to establish a meaningful connection and find ways through both the pre, post, and the trips themselves to work on how they can develop that relationship and continue it afterwards. We don't see this as sort of you go and you come back and kind of that's it. We're hoping that is the impetus for change and ongoing relationship with some of the communities or other things around in the world where our students can go and help be social entrepreneurs, or just feeling like giving their time is important to support those organizations.
And what's exciting about this is this isn't necessarily just about grade 7 to 9. This would be the idea of connecting these organizations and these experiences to our school, thinking about ways we can have them present in our school. So that idea of the exhibition, the sharing, the learning, making partnership with these organizations would mean, I'd hope, that they would be connecting with the junior school as it's developing its service learning program. And it's hard to get those partnerships going, and once we have these connections, I think there's many places that they could appear in moments when we want engagement and our students to be involved. And the same with the international ones. There's huge opportunities for us to connect, whether it's Skyping into a junior school class or a special presentation or curricular connections, all those things that we can start developing once we have these kind of firm partnerships.
I think one of the elements of our framework is that by teaching at, particularly at grade 7, through sort of a residential experience, some of the ways in which students can actually develop the skills and connections to be involved. We'll be teaching them the skills so that once they've had the experiences, they can do that on their own. Because that's obviously the ideal scenario is maybe I don't know how to be involved and I'm taught how to do that, and then I go and then I come up with a way in which I can, in a really individualized and personalized way, continue to work with that community. I think that's the scaffolding we want. And we see that in some students who are very entrepreneurial and have that kind of mindset. But for others who maybe don't have that exposure, they're sort of like, I just maybe don't know what to do or how to connect. So that's an important and critical piece for us, is the intentionality by which all of our students will now have a framework to say, okay, I want to do something, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it.
So I'm just curious, practically speaking, how are you going to allow the students to do the pre and post? I mean, they've already got a pretty tight schedule with all the classes already laid out.
Yeah.
And to me, the pre and post, and particularly the fostering of these relationships with people in various places in the world, what a gift to have for these kids. So how do you lay it out practically so they can have time? Because they've already, as I said, they've already got their classes. So
It's a really good question. So what we've done is we have allocated specific homeroom slots throughout the year. So we've got one slot per month that will be designated for the students who are obviously, in a middle school context, all available. We can now pull them from their homeroom groupings and put them into the groups based on their camp selections and have them work together as those sort of mini groups. That will look pre and post throughout the whole year.
There's not much time post.
Yeah.
No, there isn't, but there will be enough time, we think, for the students to work together on a reflective sort of exhibit of learning, which is kind of, that's the main thing where you want them to showcase. what
That
they learn.
exhibit too would be part of their experience. While they're there, there'll be meeting at night, leadership, and thinking about taking action. What are they going to do when they come back? How do they want to inspire others? Where do they want to take this? And again, it doesn't mean they're going to take it in the area of fundraising. It's about how do you want to share your story to inspire others?
Is there, do you have a minimum number of people for each kind of trip?
Yes, but I mean, we have had students right away. What if we all want to go to Ecuador, right? And so there's elements of that are possible. Like I've spoken to all service providers. They're all committed. I won't make a partnership unless they're committed to the learning experience. That is before, during, and after. It's not just the trip. I dropped one recently because they said we just take you to do a build, right? So they'll have that. Sorry, I just blanked out on what you said.
Well, so if they all want to go
Yeah,
to
they all wanna
Ecuador,
go.
that's
Sorry.
easy, right?
So if they all want to go, so yeah,
How many
most
do
of them
you
can
need?
run.
Sort of, because we can't obviously take 40 kids to Ecuador, so we'd have to split them up into separate groups to go to
Right.
different places where the organization can potentially support that.
Right.
Yeah, and we're thinking kind of 8 students, probably minimum, to go to some of the locations, just based on our supervisory ratios as well.
Right.
Typically 8 to 16 is your number. 16 would typically be the max, because that would be two chaperones with you. But you could definitely run 2, and all the organizations have said, that's not a problem. They would coordinate where there might be times you come together, and there'd be other times where you would be doing different things.
And along that, are all of the trips just in that 1 week, except for Thailand, which you specifically mentioned being maybe longer than 7 days?
Or Tanzania being
Or,
longer.
sorry,
yeah.
Tanzania.
Yeah, they're all.
just one
They would typically be the global trips are 10 days, and so you would think you would leave on the Friday or the Saturday before the week, and you'd be back by the Saturday, Sunday.
So
So
that they
we're-
come back and then they have a week off.
That's right. So
as
we're able to
opposed
use-
filling that week.
Exactly. So we're able to use some of the early part of the May break for the return travel time, and so they're back by kind of Monday at the latest, and they have the rest of that week of the May break off, as do our teachers, and then to recover, and then they return to their academic program the week following that.
So would the teachers all be gone that week? Who would teach the grade 7s and 8s?
So we would only support this with the ratios required, and we'd have the rest of the teachers still in class running. But we're of course we're planning to run the grade 7 and 8 programs alongside this. That will happen sort of for the grade 8s the following year. So those trips will kind of grow in numbers. We're doing a residential experience for the grade 7 and 8s next year, which we'll have faculty available to support that. Yeah.
And all the service providers have facilitators. So there's 1 to 8 ratio. We're always going to have say we might have 2 teachers,
Midui always has 2 facilitators. If you're in Tanzania, you'll have a couple of Maasai warriors as well with you, so you'll have community members there too. So there's a lot of adults that are involved in this.
So what happens if somebody gets sick in Tanzania?
If they get sick in Tanzania, then they would get medical care if they're there. Midui, for example, Free the Children have their own medical clinics. I've gone to lots of clinics when I'm there, but I mean, typically somebody will get sick, they'll get a cold. We've had that on most of our trips. But we have a whole risk assessment emergency plan. If we had to evacuate and have anyone go home, there's a whole plan in place. And those are things that we will totally review with you, and you would have to feel comfortable with that the risks are being mitigated and you feel safe and comfortable. But I would say with the organizations I partner with, especially with Midui, safety and well-being, emotional and physical well-being of the students is number one, and their track record is exceptional. So.
Where are the accommodations in, say, Tanzania or Thailand or Ecuador?
So those are things I'd be able to review once I get the full programs from some of the other ones. But say with Tanzania, you're staying in safari-style tents. So those are tents that have a floor and kind of canvas-style tents with bunks in them. I mean, the experience is, which is similar to the Kenya one, is you will have somebody who comes in and actually makes your bed. You have Majimoto who gives you hot water, and you go and have a shower outside in this really cool, think safari style, right? So these are portable, movable campgrounds with like your mess tent where you eat, so kind of army/safari style. And the best outhouses because they get moved around all the time, so you're not using that one that everyone uses at the campsite for 10 years. Yeah, so the facility, certainly in Tanzania, the kids all go there going, I'm in tents in the middle of the savannah. I'm like, yeah, but it's really good, and they love it. And yeah, and there's a whole community of people that work with you there as well.
To a certain extent, some of the very nitty-gritty details of a lot of these trips is still being sort of finalized. You know, we're obviously giving you kind of a rough overview of where we're at in terms of establishing those partnerships, but by the time you and your children make these selections, as Tony has indicated, we will have a full overview of the itinerary. The risk assessments will be in place. So when you're making the decision, you'll be making an informed decision about all the risks that are there, how we're planning to manage that, and whether you're comfortable with those or not. And if you're not, then there are other options, of course, for other trips that may be more or less sort of risky.
I mean, in a nutshell, the accommodations are going to be fully vetted lodges. I mean, ask the kids who went to Ecuador about Intisisa, and they're like, they want to go there back there now. Like, they love the accommodations they have. They have very high standards, the organizations do, about where they're going to eat, all bottled, all those kind of things. We'll review all the kind of safety issues around making sure you feel comfortable with the accommodations, the transportation, the kind of programming and activities they're going to do, all around that.
This is not in place of the trips at the beginning of the year though, right? Those still occur?
Those
Camps.
still occur. Those fall camps
The
still
fall
occur
climbing camps.
in the second week of our school year. Yeah.
In some ways,
Completely
it's a
separate.
bit of a model that we're looking at in terms of how we've now offered choice in that, and looking at how we can do that here.
Can you have parent chaperones with their own expenses? Or?
Could parents go on this? At this point, I would say no, because part of the experience is meant to be a separation from you. It's certainly with Midui, it's very important that the kids have an opportunity to be independent, learn how to connect with that group, and come back, having that very unique shared experience with that group away from you guys.
Related to that, could we run a separate parent trip?
You can, and Midui runs all sorts of parent trips, and they do include things like wine and other things as well, so to make it a little more adult.
What's the timeline for a commitment as far as a choice?
So we'll introduce the program, and once everything gets finalized over the summer, that's where I'll be able to introduce the programs. You'll get a full overview, an itinerary of what it looks like, cost, all those other variables. So that will happen in September. There'll be a parent presentation of that, student presentation as well, so they can see it and come home and talk to you about what they think. And then the deadline will be usually, we think, the end of October. So you have roughly October to make that decision.
So there's a couple weeks there before that initial sort of pitch presentation and where we're asking you to make the selection. And then we need kind of a week or so to sort of make final decisions about which programs we'll run and whether we need to move students around. And obviously it'll be sort of like we do for most things, kind of first choice, second choice arrangements. And then we'll place the students and come back with kind of the final arrangements, check in with people, make sure they're okay. I imagine there might be some reshuffling potentially of a couple people at that point. And that's when they'll begin that program of pre-trip learning.
And then also be parent meetings. So after the decision's been made, say you decided you want to go to Tanzania, I'm still not really sure what happens there. We'll have that initial parent meeting with you where I'll give you a full overview of the program. We'll go over the risks, and you can make sure that you feel comfortable with the choice that you've made. And then we'll also do a parent prep meeting where you will have a full understanding of what they need to bring, how we're going to communicate. Typically with these trips, there'll be some form of either social media communication, a blog, so there'll be spaces where what I found is, it's your communication that's almost more important. You just want to know that they're okay and everything's okay. If you see that picture on Twitter or you see that picture on a blog, you see them smiling, they're doing their thing, they're not so worried about you in the same way. They're having a great time, and they're connecting and discovering things they haven't before, right? Although a little true that some do experience homesickness, right, and culture shock are all part of those variables. But in the end, it's coming together there as a unique experience, and they have this really powerful group bond that's pretty special. So that's another good part.
So is the phone okay to bring? Are you allowed to bring the phone?
So those are discussions I'll have in more detail with Martin and others, but typically the pattern is you can bring your device for taking photos, but teachers will hold those devices, and they're not an international cell. They're not meant to be phoning you or anything like that, or they'll have no Wi-Fi access or internet access or 3G or less than 3G or whatever access at all. But totally, we get it, like on an airplane, they want to listen to music, play their games. There's transportation times where you use them, and the phone is an everything device, right? So they most likely will bring it, but we do want them to unplug as part of the experience. And for you to unplug with them too.
So the Eastern Canada trip has been successful for many years. By transitioning to this, what do you think the grade 9s are going to miss, essentially? Like, what are the components that you think, is kind of it's too bad, but you can only be in one place at one time. So what do you think the important things are that they're going to miss?
That's a really good question, and of course that is, in going into this, is sort of the debate we were having as a faculty, and obviously, the on-site curriculum connections for that trip were really great. I think the students really enjoyed the opportunity to sort of go away with other grade 9 students, that bonding piece, and to explore some of the on-site learning. That was amazing. I think we backed that up against the opportunity to sort of do the exposure of some of those dispositions, which we mentioned at the outset, and we just said, look, we feel we can do an adequate job of addressing some of those curriculum connections, maybe not to the same extent, but to a very, very high level. But in addition to that, we can now expose the students to the dispositions piece, which we're not currently doing at all, and we can do those to a very, very high level. So we're sort of, we match those up and we say that's a path worth pursuing, because we think we can deliver on the things we have been up at this point with Eastern Canada, and in addition now introduce this amazingly new and exciting experiential learning program. So that's the rationale for the decision, and like we said, we're not planning just to say, okay, we're not doing that. We want to address the curriculum piece of Canadian parliaments and art in other ways, but we're pretty comfortable that we can do that locally in Victoria.
And I would argue also at a grade 9 level, I think we can do better in terms of the impact of a trip. I think that having a whole entire grade go on a trip and be able to come back with a really powerful, impactful learning experience, that's really hard to do in that large a group. I've even found more than 20 kids in a group going off. You start to get people breaking up into groups, and it's hard to manage that kind of collective shared experience and bond. And I think by doing that at a grade 9 level now, I think it's the right time for getting them at a higher level of engagement and learning.
Yeah, and of course, there's the cost piece that we're saying, okay, we're able to sort of roll out. And the other thing for us is the Eastern Canada trip, which was embedded within our teaching time, is now being used in other areas, so there's no change at all to the rest of the curriculum program. We're not saying to science, for example, hey, I need to take another week of learning away in science classes, because we have that time, so we're just better able to apply it somewhere else, which, that for teachers is really important, because, that grade 9 year does have obviously academic rigor that needs to be sort of taught, and we need assurances that there's enough time to do that, so there's a good trade-off there, I think.
So will you go to Victoria next year then?
Yeah, that's the plan. The humanities department is looking at a one-day trip to Victoria to explore, and potentially having the group do it in half. So one group goes one day, another group goes the next day.
If you go on a me-to-we trip, what they're focusing on in terms of education is Canada turning 150 next year, and they want to look at the ways to connect Canada to every place they go. So they're going to be looking at the connections between Canada and Ecuador, Canada and Tanzania, and China. And so there is a whole educational component to this. And what's important to us is if we're talking about migrant laborers, in Ecuador, we should be talking about migrant laborers here in BC too, right? And looking at those connections. And that will be something that I'm really going to push, that we look at connecting locally as much as we do globally in whatever programs that we're doing.
Do you have any details as far as what part of China the trip will be to?
Well, they go into, traditionally in the past, but we haven't gone for a couple of years, so they'll go into Beijing, and then it starts with an H. It's rural China, so I know it's one of the provinces that's straight out from Beijing, and then they'll take usually take the bullet train and go to the Shaolin Temple. I'd have to look to see, it's been a while for me reviewing the actual provinces there, but usually it's two communities, one rural community just outside of Beijing, and then they go down to another province where they work with the monks, and they get to learn Kung Fu, and then they have a meal with the monks where, as you know, you have to be completely quiet if you're eating, and then they go and work with a particular orphanage that the monks support. That I know from our previous trips, which was about 3 years ago, was just an amazing experience. And we even talked about whether we wanted to support specifically that orphanage. And so we'll talk to me about the possibilities. And again, what we want is, if we support the Shaolin Temple and what they do, it'd be really cool if kids are talking about the Shaolin Temple in grade 5, and I'm looking forward to that opportunity. And the grade 12s know the Shaolin Temple, and we have that kind of culture in our school where we've shared something collective, and we have connections that are meaningful and sustainable. That's the goal. Not just a one-off thing.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate the dialogue. It's helpful for us, because obviously the questions help us further sort of refine as well areas where we might need to invest some more research, or certainly we're picking up the that risk management piece. Obviously is something that parents will want kind of in a lot more detail before they can make decisions, and of course we're aware of that, but it's easy to sort of overlook that as a small piece for the registration. So thank you so much. We'll be back in touch with you early September to sort of provide more detail and allow you to have more concrete decisions about what we're doing. But we think this is going to be amazing for the grade 9. We're really excited about it. So.
And if you're excited about any of those trips, if you think, I'd really like to consider Tanzania, but I'm not sure, I'm happy to talk to you one-to-one and tell you about what are the things that we do to mitigate risks, what are all the, what do they eat, how do they get there, all those kind of things. I'm happy to talk to you.
One other thing, as far as fundraising for the trips and children being somewhat responsible for their own life, is there any thought about them trying to raise money for their own trips, or them being responsible for paying for part of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that we have done as a school before. I know that many families, obviously with summer coming up, for example, I know many families will be having discussions with their children about saying, look, there are these options coming up next year. You need to be able to earn a certain amount of money over the course of the summer to fund your own way. So, that is an option that I know a number of parents increasingly are saying, whether that's, work around our specific house that you're paid for, or in the community, or getting a job. I mean, obviously that's something we would encourage, but we don't do anything internally within the school, because obviously the capacity we have, given that we're gonna have all of our teachers who are supporting these trips managing the logistics and the risk assessments. It's just taking on the fundraising piece would just be,
It's a personal decision.
it is,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. That's a good question.
But there's probably some previous history of spending money budget for all those trips that would be useful information at this point.
Like a price range?
No, I mean more of what Anita's talking about, that, you know, on all those trips, there's usually, you know, you need, that there's, the trip costs this much, but you need to have money for this many
Yeah.
meals.
Yeah.
And if you think you're gonna be buying souvenirs or something, you need money for that too.
Gotcha.
So that's the number I think Anita's looking for.
Well, typically on that, it tends to be up to you in terms of how much, but in terms of the food and programs are paid fully, except for airports, right, where they may be picking up food in the airports. And then, yes, except for gifts. And usually for our students, we say $200 US to bring, but they can easily survive.
I'm
on
thinking more just
100.
the trip itself, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in grade 9, they're 14 years old
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
They can babysit, they can rake leaves,
Absolutely.
they can shovel
Yeah.
snow, and my money tree is, yeah, I keep
So
shaking
If
it.
you would like to
But
have,
I'd love to
It's
be
not
able-
working so
you
good.
know, you know, so, you know.
that could be a
we're gonna
conversation that we
early.
have in that pre-trip
We're
programming,
right
but
to go.
it might not be soon enough. Like, ideally, we would launch something like this, and we have to some degree already with them, like in now, before the summer. And maybe the summer could be part of their planning. What can you do
What
to
can you
support this?
Well, and certainly with the trips when they were optional, we had conversations in our house about, well, if you want to do that, you need to pay this
Yeah.
percent of that,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
it's a great learning experience, but part of my job as a parent is to raise fiscally responsible taxpayers.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And, you know, if she thinks it all just appears magically, that's not really
Right.
doing her much of a favor in the real world.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
you know, I support that, you know, every family can make their own choice about that, but, you know, I'm certainly one of the parents that's gonna say, if you wanna do that, you need to pay this much of it.
There's no question, and certainly, you know, we've spoken to the children, you know, they know this is coming up, and, you know, the parents will know this is coming up, and I think to go home and have those conversations now, there's enough time now between now and next May where you can say, look, you know, it's essentially 12 months away, and if you want to go, you need to fundraise X amount of money on your own, and the summer is a perfect time to do that. Christmas holidays and the different breaks, babysitting and things like that. Certainly, we would hope there's enough time where the students who, you know, are taking the initiative will be able to do that on their own.
Yep, and what kind of amount are you thinking some of those international trips are? Is it
What are you
$3
thinking,
grand?
Tony?
Is it $5 grand?
The typical cost of the trip is $4,000 in that range, but it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the case for all of them, and that's kind of the general range. When I talk to Fiji, it's, you know, they're saying, it depends, right? They're
Yeah.
saying lower prices, so there's so many variables in there. Obviously, our goal is to bring it down as low as we can, so it's as reasonable and affordable to as many people as possible, while being respectful that programs, say, for example, like Me to We, 50% goes to Free the Children, 50% gets reinvested in youth empowerment. So we're supporting social enterprises that are doing good just by what we're doing with them too. So there's only so much wiggle room sometimes.
Do you think you'll be making a call whether you're going to ditch the local ones as if everybody wants to go global? Will that
Yeah.
be quite early in the day?
I think that probably won't happen until the following year, where we introduce this program for the grade 8s and 9s together. Because we think with that larger volume of students, there will be probably many more. I mean, I think it is foreseeable that this current group of grade 9s, albeit with the support of their parents, they may choose many more international trips, simply because this is the first year of the program, and they'll see that as kind of a highlight program, and they would have been going to Eastern Canada anyway. I would think the following year, when we introduce it to grade 8s and 9s, I think we'll have more students who are at grade 8 saying, you know what, I would probably, and the parents, I prefer you to go local in grade 8,
Yeah.
maybe international in grade 9. And so we won't necessarily ditch them. We would hope a couple of them will run, certainly as pilot projects for us to get a sense of what they are. But if they don't, we will keep those contacts ready for the following year when we roll it out to to 2 grades.
And if they don't, I'm really hoping to promote them as a
Yeah.
go local opportunity next year for kids who want to get out there and do something in the community. Well, Quest is that we'll bring in, we'll do a go local fair. Like, so what can you do in your local community? And here's some great partners that we're trying to really create a good
It
relationship.
could be also something that, you know, we've had discussions about as a preliminary option that for, you know, if no grade 9s next year sign up, we introduce a couple of them as sort of a taster for the grade 8s next year during that same week, just to sort of run them in between then and the following year where we launch to grade 8s as well.
So there are still international opportunities in grade 10, 11, 12 anyways, right?
Well, we've got a Ladakh trip running, I think this summer, is that right? The Ladakh trip?
So that they're looking at, so Mr. Davis is looking at piloting a trip to the Ladakh, I believe it's called, or it's called the Himalayan Health Project.
Yeah.
And so it's a really innovative, exciting project in Ladakh, so in northern India, and where the United World Colleges and other international schools go there. So he's trying to get that launched as a project that would be a long-term one that would be the focus for senior school, as opposed to offering other choices. But again, all of this is beginning. These are new models
that's
that are
the
rolling
following
out.
year. And the
But are there still
GEO,
service trips?
the GEO
Like
options that we'll
voluntary?
run next year, Tony?
At this point, that's all that Mr. Davis has asked for in terms of other trips. So if that's something that
So-
you wanted to follow up on, so there are no other options in grade 10 to 12 right now, other than looking at the Ladakh experience.
So, and is that part of the curriculum, or is that a voluntary service trip?
Voluntary in after school ends.
Okay, so that, like the trip that used to go to China at the end of school, or to other
We
things,
used to
in
have
spring
camp, well,
break?
for example, we have a group of grade 10s going to Kenya this year. So that trip now has been moved to, like the Kenya, Tanzania, they're both, it's on the border, they're the Maasai community, so we're moving that to the grade 9 for.
Okay, so if they don't go, so really, I think the question I'm asking is, if they don't go international in grade 10, there doesn't appear to be many future global trips except the one to the Himalayas.
So part of the vision is at this point really is hitting that grade 10 year is kind of that final year where they're going to have a project, a CAS project, a DP CAS project for grade 11 and 12, and the real hope is that they dig in locally. And some of that also has to do with the realities of the higher expectations of the IB diploma program, but also it's time to really focus on other things and whether or not they have the capacity. But those are good questions, and right now Ladakh has been put forward as
The senior
a
option.
long-term, hoping to develop a relationship that goes again beyond just the trip.
Is Ladakh a place? I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a Himalayan community, I believe. I've spoken to Mr. Davis, and he would have far more detail, but I believe it's a village, and there's a medical component or element to it where they're providing medical service. So they work alongside the doctors and healthcare providers within the community. So
On the border of China, right? And then its actual jurisdiction is sort of blurred amongst India and China.
Was Dominican Republic on the list?
So it was, but that's the partner I had a long conversation with.
Oh,
It's called Live Different. They're like a Me2We organization, but they were not willing to offer the more comprehensive package that I'm looking at. Another one that is out there is Costa Rica as well, and that's what Global Insight Global does. They also go to Uganda. There's all of these organizations have many possibilities. Nicaragua is on there as well. Problem with Nicaragua, in some places we have to consider visas, and there are some members of our community that it's where it can be harder to get visas, and we have to make sure the countries are accessible to everybody, and it's feasible for all our students.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.